You ever see a woman destroy everything she has in a single moment? I did. And instead of screaming, crying, or begging for answers, I smiled. Because that was the moment I knew I was about to ruin her life. I came home a little earlier than usual that day. Not because I suspected anything. No, that would imply she was smart enough to be subtle. I had just finished a big project at work and decided to take a half day, surprise my loving wife with some dinner, maybe a nice bottle of wine. I even picked up her favorite sushi. You see, I was a good husband. The kind that worked hard, stayed loyal, and took care of his woman. The kind that idiots like her take for granted. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Normally, she'd be watching TV, talking on the phone, or humming some song she half remembered from college. But that day, nothing. Just silence. It was the kind of silence that tells you something's wrong before you even see it. I walked upstairs, and as I reached the bedroom door, I heard it. Voices. Whispered words. The kind you only say when you think no one else is listening. I didn't barge in. That's what weak men do. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened the voice recorder, and pressed play. Then, with the calmness of a man already 3 steps ahead, I pushed the door open. There she was. My beautiful, devoted wife. In our bed. With someone who was very much not me. The guy, some gym rat with the intelligence of a houseplant, looked at me like a deer in headlights. She, on the other hand, went pale. And that was the moment I saw it. Not guilt, not regret, but fear. Fear of what I would do next. I could have yelled. I could have thrown punches, broken things, called her every name in the book. But that's what she expected. That's what cheaters hope for, because anger means emotion. And emotion means you still care. Instead, I did something much worse. I laughed. Not the kind of laugh you give when you hear a joke. No, this was something colder, sharper. The kind of laugh that makes your skin crawl because you know something is very, very wrong. Wow, I said, shaking my head. You really thought I wouldn't find out? She opened her mouth, probably to say something stupid like, it's not what it looks like. As if there was another explanation for her being tangled up with some half-naked loser in our bed. But I held up a hand. Don't. Just don't embarrass yourself further. I turned to the guy. You can go now. He hesitated. Brave, for an idiot. I said go. He grabbed his clothes and bolted like a kicked dog. That left just me and her. My wife. My betrayer. She sat up, wrapping the sheets around herself like that would somehow erase what just happened. I cut her off. You know the funniest thing? I was actually going to take you on vacation next month. A real one. Europe, first class, the whole thing. I pulled my phone out and scrolled through the confirmation email. Showed it to her. Non-refundable, of course. Guess I'll have to find someone else to go with me. Her eyes widened, and I saw it. The first crack in her pathetic little world. Good. I made a mistake, she whispered. I smirked. Oh, sweetheart. You made a lot of mistakes. But the biggest one? Thinking I was stupid. She flinched. Good. I wanted her to flinch. I could leave you. I continued, pacing slowly. Right now? Pack a bag, file for divorce. Leave you in the wreckage of your own choices. And that would hurt, sure. But it would be too easy. Too quick. I stopped in front of her, tilting my head slightly. No. You don't deserve an escape. You deserve to feel what I felt, but worse. Her breathing quickened. What does that mean? I smiled. It means, my love, that I forgive you. That made her freeze. That wasn't the reaction she expected. Forgiveness? No, that wasn't right. That wasn't how this was supposed to go. But, I added, leaning in just slightly, things are going to change around here. You want to stay? Fine. But you're going to earn it. Every single day. You're going to wake up wondering if today is the day I finally leave. You're going to see me treat you with kindness, with affection, with care, just enough to make you think you still have a chance. And just when you start to believe it, when you think we're okay again. I chuckled. I'll remind you. Subtly. A little slip of the tongue. A small joke at your expense. A moment of distance just long enough to make you paranoid. She shook her head, tears forming. You wouldn't. I just looked at her. And she realized, in that moment, that I absolutely would. Sleep well, darling, I said, grabbing my keys. I'm heading out. Don't wait up. I left her sitting there, shaking, breaking, knowing she had just stepped into a living nightmare. And the best part? It was only just beginning. They say hindsight is 20/20ths. That when you look back, You start seeing all the little signs, all the cracks in the perfect picture you once believed in. And maybe that's true. But before I knew, before the lies, the betrayal, the cold calculation of my revenge, my life was good. Or at least, I thought it was. Mornings in our house had a rhythm. I'd wake up first, always before her, because she loved to sleep in. I'd get out of bed quietly, careful not to wake her, and head to the kitchen. Coffee first, always black, then a quick shower before work. By the time I came back to the bedroom to grab my tie, she'd be stirring, mumbling something incoherent about how it was too early. I'd chuckle, kiss her forehead, and tell her to sleep a little longer. She always did. Breakfast was simple, usually toast or eggs, nothing fancy. She used to joke that I wasn't a real cook, that if it weren't for her, I'd survive on takeout. And I'd laugh, playfully protest, but deep down, I liked that she took care of those little things. It felt like balance. I worked hard, handled the finances, made sure we had a good life, and she made it feel like home. I remember the way she'd come up behind me in the mornings, still in her oversized sleep shirt, wrapping her arms around my waist while I sipped my coffee. "Why do you always smell so good this early?" she'd murmur, half asleep. And I'd smirk, taking it as a small victory. That was our life, easy, effortless, familiar. Weekends were even better. Lazy mornings, long brunches at our favorite spot downtown. She always ordered the same thing, avocado toast with extra feta, a caramel latte on the side. I used to tease her about it, but she'd just roll her eyes and say, "Why fix what isn't broken?" Ironic, looking back. We had our little rituals. Friday nights were for movie marathons, curled up on the couch, debating over which film to watch until I eventually let her pick. Saturdays, we'd visit her parents, pretend we weren't exhausted from the work week, and listen to her mom subtly hint about grandkids. Sundays were grocery days, the most mundane yet oddly intimate part of our routine. I'd push the cart, she'd check items off the list, sneaking in things we didn't need, for later, she'd say with a wink, "I thought we were happy." And maybe, in some twisted way, she did too. Maybe she loved me in the way people love old sweaters, comfortable, reliable, safe, but not exciting. And that's where the cracks started. Looking back, I remember the first small sign. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a shift. The way she started being glued to her phone more often, tilting the screen away slightly when I walked by. The way she'd take longer to get ready, choosing outfits that weren't quite for me but for something else. The way she started coming home later than usual, brushing it off with meetings or girl nights that never used to happen before. And then there were the things I ignored. The way she stopped asking me about my day. The way our conversations became lighter, surface level, like we were playing house instead of living in one. The way she'd pull away just slightly when I kissed her, a hesitation so small it was almost imperceptible. Almost. I told myself it was normal. That relationships had phases, ups and downs. That we were fine. But now I know better. Now I know that when someone pulls away, it's not random. It's preparation. A slow, careful detachment before the fall. But back then, I was still the guy who picked up sushi for his wife, who planned surprise trips, who thought love was enough. I was still the fool who believed that loyalty was a two-way street. And that's what makes the betrayal worse, isn't it? Not just the act, but the lie of it all. The way someone can look you in the eyes, say, "I love you," and still go off to be with someone else. The way they can smile, kiss you, play the role of the devoted partner, while in the back of their mind, they're planning their next move. I had no idea what was coming. No clue that I was walking into the kind of pain that shifts something inside you forever. But soon, I'd know. And soon, she'd regret ever thinking I was the kind of man who would just take it and walk away. They say your gut always knows before your mind catches up. And I believe that. Because the first time something fell off, I couldn't even explain why. There was no dramatic moment, no lipstick on the collar or secret love note. Just a shift. Subtle. Almost invisible. Almost. It started with the way she looked at her phone. Before, she never cared if it was lying around. She'd leave it on the kitchen counter, unlocked, scrolling through messages absent-mindedly while we watched TV. But now it was always face down. Always in her hand. And when it wasn't, it was tucked away in her purse, zipped up like a secret. I noticed it one evening while we were sitting on the couch. She had just come back from drinks with the girls, her cheeks slightly flushed, her smile a little too bright. Something about her energy felt different, almost forced. Like she was playing a role instead of just being. Her phone buzzed. She barely glanced at it before flipping it over, her fingers curling around it as if I might try to grab it. That was new. I didn't say anything at first, just observed. The way she hesitated before going to the bathroom, taking her phone with her instead of leaving it on the table. The way she started keeping it on silent, no more random pings or notifications lighting up the screen. The way she started laughing at messages and quickly composing replies, her body angled slightly away from me. None of these things, on their own, were proof of anything. But they weren't nothing, either. Then came the gym. She had never been much of a fitness enthusiast. Sure, she'd go every now and then, mostly for yoga or the occasional spin class. But suddenly, she was all in. 4-5 times a week. Strength training, cardio, personal training sessions she had never mentioned before. At first, I supported it. Who wouldn't? That's great, I told her. Proud of you for committing to it. And I meant it. But something about the way she avoided details made me pause. Who's your trainer? I asked one night, casually. Oh, just some guy at the gym, she replied too quickly. He's really good. Just some guy? A small thing. A detail. But it stuck. Because my wife? She never referred to people that vaguely. She was the kind of person who remembered the barista's name after one visit. The kind who told you her coworker's entire life story after a 5-minute chat. But now, suddenly, her personal trainer, someone she was seeing multiple times a week, was just some guy? The next time she went, I decided to swing by. Not in a jealous, obsessive way. Just curiosity. I happened to finish work early. I was in the area. It made sense to stop by and maybe surprise her, offer to grab dinner afterward. She wasn't there. Or at least, she wasn't where she said she'd be. I checked, walked through the gym, scanned the weight area, the treadmills, even peeked into the group fitness classes. Nothing. I could have called her. Could have asked outright. But I didn't. Instead, I waited. 2 hours later, she came home, sweaty, flushed, a gym bag slung over her shoulder. Ugh, she sighed, dropping onto the couch. Brutal session today. I just watched her. Yeah, I said, leaning back. What did you do? Oh, squats, some deadlifts. The usual. At a gym she hadn't been to. Something twisted in my stomach. Not anger. Not yet. But a slow, creeping realization that I was standing at the edge of something big, something ugly. I didn't confront her then. That would have been pointless. No one confesses at the first sign of suspicion. Instead, I filed it away. Logged it, like an entry in a ledger. The phone. The trainer. The lie. 3 strikes. And I was just getting started. There's a moment when suspicion stops being just a thought in the back of your mind and turns into something sharper, something with weight. That moment had come for me. The gym lie was the tipping point. The way she dodged my questions, the sudden attachment to her phone, the forced brightness in her smile every time she came home late. I wasn't dealing with coincidences. I was dealing with a pattern. And patterns meant something was there. I didn't confront her. That would have been sloppy. Instead, I did what any rational man would do. I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I watched how she moved through our house, how she spoke to me, the way her habits had shifted ever so slightly. She thought she was being careful, but that was the thing about cheaters. They always get comfortable. They always think they're one step ahead. The first thing I checked was her phone. Not by snooping. No, I didn't need to be that obvious. I just waited. She had always been an open book with me before, handing me her phone to change the music in the car, letting me text her mom back while she was driving. But now, she never let it out of her sight. Even in the shower, it was with her. And when she slept, it was under her pillow. One night, while she was in the bathroom, I casually asked, "Hey, what's your passcode again? I need to check something." I didn't actually need to check anything. I already knew the answer. It had always been the same, our anniversary date. A small, sentimental thing. But she froze for half a second, just long enough for me to catch it, before forcing a smile. "Oh, I changed it last week. Just felt like mixing things up." "Interesting." I nodded, acting like I didn't care. "No problem." And I let it slide. But inside, I was already adding it to the list. Next was her location. Before, we both had our locations shared on our phones. Not because we were keeping tabs on each other, but because it was convenient. If she was running errands, I could see when she was on her way home. If I was out with friends, she'd know if I got back safely. It had never been a big deal. Until now. A few days later, I checked. The little dot that used to show where she was? Gone. Disabled. Another coincidence? I didn't think so. I brought it up casually over dinner, stabbing a piece of steak with my fork. Hey, did you turn off location sharing? She barely looked up. Oh yeah, I think my phone reset or something. I'll fix it later. She never did. I smiled and nodded like I believed her. Like I was still the clueless, trusting husband she thought I was. The next step was testing her lies. I knew she was lying. I just didn't know how deep it went. So I started asking small, innocent questions. How was the gym? Who'd you go with? What time did you leave? And I paid attention, not just to her words, but to her body language. The way she played with her hair when she spoke, the way her eyes darted slightly to the left when she made something up. Then I started planting little traps. One night, she told me she was going to meet up with her friend Lisa. I nodded, kissed her cheek, and watched her leave. Then, I sent Lisa a text. Hey, hope you, and wife's name, have a good time tonight. Her response came back almost instantly. What? I haven't seen her in weeks. And just like that, the last bit of doubt I had disappeared. She was lying to my face. Repeatedly, confidently, as if I was stupid. I sat there for a moment, my fingers tightening around my phone, but I didn't get angry. No, that wasn't my style. Anger makes you reckless. I needed to be smart. I started checking our bank statements. Small charges at places she never used to go. Hotel bars. Coffee shops on the other side of town. Late-night Uber rides. Then, I checked our home security system. We had a simple camera setup, nothing fancy, just enough to see who came and went. I pulled up the logs. There it was. Multiple nights where she had left after I had gone to bed, coming back hours later. I was no longer collecting clues. I had the truth. Now, all I needed was proof. And soon, I would have that too. People talk about the moment they catch a cheating partner like it's an explosion, rage, screaming, a dramatic confrontation. But that's not how it happens. Not for me. For me, it was slow, cold, and quiet. A realization that sank in like poison, spreading through my veins, turning something inside me to ice. It happened on a Tuesday. Nothing special about the day, nothing different. She had kissed me goodbye that morning, just like always, smiling in that easy, practiced way. Love you, she had said, slipping out the door. I had looked at her and, for the first time, known with absolute certainty that every word out of her mouth was a lie. I didn't go to work that day. Instead, I stayed home and did what I should have done weeks ago. I had the suspicions, I had the inconsistencies, but I needed the proof. And I was going to find it. Her laptop was the first stop. She rarely used it at home anymore, always on her phone, but she wasn't careful. People never are when they think they're winning. I opened the device, typed in the password. The old one didn't work. She had changed it. Of course she had. I almost smiled. Almost. Because there was something about how predictable cheaters were that made this whole thing almost pathetic. But I wasn't worried. Because while she had been sneaking around, I had been learning. I knew her habits, her favorite phrases, the way her mind worked. It took me less than 10 tries. The moment I got in, I went straight to the messages. Nothing. Emails? Clean. Too clean. But the mistake? The mistake was in the cloud. Because when I opened the photo storage, I found them. Screenshots. Messages. A photo of her, taken in a dimly lit restaurant, smiling across the table at someone whose face wasn't visible, but his hand, his watch, his wedding ring, they were. Married. Of course he was. I clicked the screenshots, my eyes scanning the words. I can't stop thinking about last night. He doesn't suspect a thing. I wish we could be together for real. A part of me expected to feel something big. Some kind of explosion inside me, a burst of rage, a shattering of my world. But that's not what happened. Instead, I felt calm. An eerie, unnatural calm. Because this wasn't just betrayal. This was stupidity. This was her thinking she could do this and get away with it. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the screen. My heartbeat didn't even spike. My fingers tapped against the desk as the plan started forming, effortlessly, naturally, like it had been waiting for this moment to reveal itself. She thought she was in control. She had no idea. I transferred the files to my own storage, made copies, multiple backups. I wasn't about to make the mistake of losing this evidence. Then, I checked the timestamps. The messages went back months. Late nights at the gym, girls' nights, weekend, errands. Every single lie, laid out in neat little timestamped confessions. She had no idea what was coming. I closed the laptop, took a deep breath, and exhaled slowly. I wasn't going to confront her tonight. No, that would be too easy, too expected. I wanted her to feel safe, to think she had gotten away with it, to keep lying to my face while I built the perfect revenge. She walked through the door that evening, smiling, acting like she wasn't the worst kind of person. I kissed her cheek, let my hands linger on her waist like I always did. And in that moment, I knew this was the beginning of the end. But she wouldn't see it coming. Not yet. Revenge wasn't about destruction. Not really. Destruction was too quick, too chaotic. No, true revenge was about precision, about control, about making someone feel the weight of their choices so completely that they couldn't escape it, not for a day, not for a moment, not even in their own mind. That was the kind of revenge I wanted, and that was exactly what I was going to deliver. I spent the next few nights thinking, planning, not in a rushed, emotional way, but with the same meticulous strategy one used at work when closing a high-stakes deal. She thought she had fooled me, that I was still the loving, clueless husband. That was her first mistake. But her second mistake, the bigger one, was assuming that if I ever found out, I'd react like every other man, anger, confrontation, maybe even just walking away. No, that wasn't my style. I wanted her to suffer, but not in a way she'd expect. I wanted her to watch everything she cared about slip through her fingers, piece by piece, while I smiled and stayed just out of reach. Her weak spot was control. She liked to think she was in charge, that she could manipulate the narrative. So I would make her believe she still had it. I wouldn't expose her yet. Wouldn't let her know I had the proof. Instead, I would slowly, methodically make her world collapse around her while she still thought she had a grip on it. Step 1 was simple, distance. Not physical, but emotional. I made sure she felt me slipping away, but not in a way she could put her finger on. I was still affectionate, still played the role of the devoted husband, but I gave her just enough coldness to make her doubt herself. I stopped asking about her day, stopped reacting to her little touches, stopped giving her those small reassurances she was used to. I let her start feeling the shift before she could even pinpoint why. Step 2 was planting the seed of paranoia. I started coming home later than usual, leaving my phone on silent, stepping outside for private calls that didn't actually exist. I made sure she noticed me checking my messages more often, smirking at my screen, leaving the room when I answered a text. And just like that, the doubt started to creep in. Was I hiding something? Was I the one pulling away? Was she losing control of me? It didn't take long for her to start cracking. She asked more questions. Where were you? Who were you talking to? But I never gave her a straight answer. Just smiled, shrugged, said something vague, the same way she had done to me for months. And the best part? She couldn't push too hard, because if she accused me of something, she'd open the door to me doing the same. And she couldn't afford that. Step 3 was turning her world against her. She thought she was being discreet, but I knew her patterns, her weaknesses. I knew who she confided in, her best friend, her sister, people who trusted her, people who still thought she was the devoted wife. And that was where I struck next. One by one, I started dropping hints. Not outright exposing her, no, that would be too easy. Instead, I let them come to their own conclusions. A casual comment to her best friend, she's been so distracted lately. I hope everything's okay. A carefully placed question to her sister, has she mentioned anything about feeling distant? She seems off. Nothing too obvious. Just enough to plant the idea in their heads that something was wrong. And then I let time do the work. It didn't take long for them to notice the things I had already seen. The late nights, the secrecy, the small changes in behavior. Soon, they started questioning her too. You've been different lately. Is everything okay with you and him? And just like that, she started feeling trapped, realizing that the people closest to her were no longer in her corner the way they once were. Step 4 was making her feel replaceable. She had been so sure of her control over me, so confident in her ability to juggle both lives. So I made her doubt it. I started working out more, dressing better, being more social. Not in a desperate way, not in a way that screamed, look at me. No, I was subtle. I made sure she noticed, but never brought it up. I let her sit with the fear that maybe, just maybe, I was slipping away from her. And the worst part? I wasn't even doing anything wrong. But to her, it felt like I was. The final step was the perfect trap. A weekend trip. Something she wouldn't refuse. I planned it like everything was normal, told her we needed some time together, that I had something special in mind. I let her think this was her second chance. That maybe, just maybe, she could salvage things before I pulled away completely. But what she didn't know was that this wasn't a vacation. This was a setup. The hotel was booked, the restaurant reservations made, but instead of just the two of us, I had a different guest list in mind. Because sitting at that dinner table wouldn't just be her and me. It would be her and the people she had lied to. Her best friend, her sister, and, just for good measure, the wife of the man she had been sneaking around with. I wasn't going to expose her with screaming or drama. No, I was going to let her sit there, surrounded by people who now knew. I was going to watch as realization dawned on her face, as the weight of what she had done came crashing down all at once. I was going to let her destroy herself while I sat back, calm, composed, untouchable. And when the night was over, when she was standing there with nothing left, when her world had finally crumbled the way she had crumbled mine, I would smile, say nothing, and walk away. The trap was set. Every detail, every moving piece, timed to perfection. She had no idea, no suspicion, no inkling that the floor beneath her was about to collapse. That was the beauty of it. She still thought she was in control. She still believed she was the one juggling two lives, slipping between lies without consequence. But tonight, she would learn the truth. Tonight, she would watch as her carefully built web of deception unraveled in front of the very people she had fooled. I had chosen the restaurant carefully. Upscale, intimate, the kind of place where reservations had to be made weeks in advance. A place where the waiters spoke softly, where appearances mattered, where people whispered about scandals rather than causing scenes. She thought this was a romantic getaway, a rekindling of something she had already burned to the ground. I let her believe it. I watched as she dressed up, carefully choosing her outfit, applying her makeup with precision. She wanted to look perfect for me. Or maybe for the illusion she was still desperately trying to maintain. The drive there was filled with small talk. She laughed, touched my arm, played the role of the loving wife. I responded just enough to keep the act going, but inside, I was calm, focused. Because while she was planning to charm me back into her web, I was leading her straight into mine. When we arrived, she glanced around the restaurant approvingly. "This is nice," she murmured, leaning into me slightly. "Feels special." I smiled. "It is." The hostess led us to our table, a private corner, dimly lit, just secluded enough. She sat down, still oblivious, still confident. I took my time, ordering wine, letting the night build. Then, right on cue, the real guest arrived. Her best friend was first, then her sister, then the final guest, his wife. The moment she saw them, her entire body stiffened. The carefully curated expression on her face cracked, just for a second, just enough for me to see the fear flashing behind her eyes. And then, the real moment of realization, the slow turn of her head as she looked at me, her lips slightly parted, the silent question hanging in the air. She wasn't asking, "Why are they here?" She already knew. I leaned back, sipping my wine, watching the panic settle in. "I thought it'd be nice," I said casually, "to have dinner with the people who matter most in your life." Her best friend was the first to speak. "So," she said slowly, setting down her napkin. "Anything you want to tell us?" Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. I don't understand." His wife leaned forward, her voice cold and sharp. "Oh, I think you do." She slid her phone across the table. Screenshots. Messages. The same ones I had found weeks ago. My wife didn't move. She didn't breathe. I could see it, the war inside her head. The desperate scramble for an excuse, a lie, anything that would make this moment disappear. But there was nothing. Her sister was next. "All this time, you looked me in the eye and lied. Do you even feel bad? Or are you just upset you got caught?" A sharp exhale. I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Don't. Just don't." My voice was even, calm. "I've listened to enough lies already." She turned to me then, her eyes pleading. "We can talk about this." I shook my head, my smirk widening. "Oh, we're past that, love. Way past that." The realization hit her then. That this wasn't just a confrontation. This wasn't just a dinner. This was the end. His wife stood abruptly, tossing a few bills on the table. "I have everything I need," she said flatly. "Enjoy the rest of your meal." She walked out without another glance. My wife's best friend exchanged a look with her sister before following suit. And then, it was just us. She sat there, motionless, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to something only she could hear. "You thought you could get away with it," I murmured. "You thought I wouldn't find out. That I'd never notice." I let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. But the best part? I knew before you even had a chance to regret it. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head, grasping at something, anything. But I pushed my chair back, standing smoothly. I'll be sending you the divorce papers tomorrow. I pulled out my wallet, tossing just enough cash on the table to cover my meal. You can pay for yours. And with that, I walked out, leaving her there, broken, exposed, and exactly where she deserved to be. I was already outside when I heard the sound of hurried footsteps behind me. The sharp clicking of heels against the pavement, the frantic energy of someone who had just realized the walls had closed in. I didn't turn around immediately. I wanted her to feel it, the panic, the desperation, the weight of everything crashing down all at once. When I finally did glance over my shoulder, she was there, standing under the soft glow of the restaurant's lights, her eyes wide, her chest rising and falling too quickly, like she couldn't get enough air. "Wait," she gasped, reaching out toward me, but stopping herself just before her fingers touched my sleeve. Even now, with her world crumbling, she knew better than to overstep. "Please, just listen." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched her. And that silence? It did something to her. Her bottom lip quivered. Her shoulders tensed. She wasn't in control anymore. "I can explain," she rushed out, her voice shaking. It wasn't what it looked like. I mean, I know how it looks, but you have to believe me." A slow smirk tugged at the corner of my mouth. "Believe you?" I echoed, as if the word itself was foreign to me now. That's an interesting choice of words. She swallowed hard, eyes darting between mine, looking for any sign of weakness, any sliver of hope she could cling to. There was none. "I was stupid," she whispered, her voice breaking. I got caught up in something that wasn't real, and I made a mistake. But I never stopped loving you. You were my real life. I swear to you, I was going to end it." A quiet chuckle left my lips, and I could see how much that unnerved her. She had expected anger, yelling, emotion, but that wasn't what she was getting. Instead, she was standing in front of a man who had already decided her fate, a man who was simply waiting to watch her realize that. "You were going to end it," I repeated, nodding slowly. "That's funny, because from what I saw, you were doing a really great job of keeping it going." Her face twisted with something between shame and frustration. She knew she was losing this battle. She was grasping at straws, trying to find something that would make this go away. "I panicked," she admitted. "I didn't know how to stop. It wasn't about you. It wasn't because I didn't love you." I tilted my head slightly. "No." She shook her head quickly, stepping closer, like proximity would somehow fix what she had done. "No, I was lost. I got caught up in the excitement, the attention. But it didn't mean anything. You mean something. Please, you have to understand that." I took a slow breath, let it settle, let her hope for just a second that maybe she was getting through to me. And then I said, "Do you remember the night you told me you were meeting Lisa for dinner?" She blinked, her brows knitting together, caught off guard by the shift. "What? Lisa?" I repeated, my voice eerily calm. "The night you left the house in that black dress, kissed me on the cheek, and told me you were going to see her." I watched as her throat bobbed, as her hands clenched into small fists at her sides. "I texted Lisa that night. She hadn't seen you in weeks." Panic, pure, unfiltered panic flashed across her face. She tried to mask it, tried to recover, but it was already too late. I must have mixed up the days," she stammered. I smiled. "Right. A mix-up." I took a step closer, just enough for her to feel the weight of my presence, and dropped my voice lower. "You've been caught in every single lie, and your instinct is to tell another one?" I let the silence hang between us before shaking my head. "Pathetic." She sucked in a sharp breath, her bottom lip trembling. The tears were coming now, pooling in her eyes, threatening to spill over. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "I'll do anything to fix this. Anything. Just, please don't leave me." I watched her, taking in the way her body shook, the way her entire world had crumbled within a single evening. And then I said the words that would haunt her for years. "Oh, sweetheart." I sighed, my smirk widening. "You lost me the moment you thought I was stupid enough to believe you." Her breath hitched, her hands flying up to cover her mouth as a choked sob escaped. She knew. She finally knew. I straightened my jacket, took one last glance at the broken woman in front of me, and stepped past her without another word. I didn't need to hear her apologies, her excuses, her desperate pleas. They meant nothing. As I walked away, I heard her voice crack behind me. "Please." I didn't turn around. I didn't stop. because she wasn't my problem anymore. The fallout was inevitable. The moment I walked away that night, her life started unraveling, thread by thread, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Because this wasn't just about me leaving. This wasn't just about a broken marriage or an affair exposed. This was about consequences, the kind that don't just sting for a moment but linger, the kind that stain your name and hollow you out from the inside. And I made sure she felt every single one of them. It started small. Her best friend, the one who sat at that dinner table watching the truth unfold in real time, cut her off completely. No dramatic speech, no second chances, just silence. And that silence spread. The people she trusted, the ones she thought would always be there, suddenly weren't. Conversations ended when she entered the room. Texts went unanswered. Invitations stopped coming. Because no one wants to be associated with someone who built their life on lies, someone who looked them in the eyes for years while betraying the very foundation of friendship. Then came her family. Her sister was furious, not just about the affair but about the deception, about how easily she had lied to everyone, spinning stories and covering tracks like it was second nature. Their parents weren't much better. Disappointed, embarrassed. They didn't disown her, but they didn't defend her either. Because how do you defend the indefensible? How do you justify watching your own daughter destroy something good with her own hands? And then there was him. The other man. Or, should I say, the other fool. Because his life didn't escape the wreckage either. His wife, who had sat at that table with us, had come prepared. I had made sure of it. She wasn't the type to make a scene, but she was the type to be thorough. Within a week, she had filed for divorce, frozen their accounts, and ensured that every single asset they had together was being split in her favor. By the time he realized what was happening, he was left with nothing but regret and a cheap apartment on the other side of town. And as for her, the woman who thought she could juggle two lives without consequence, he didn't want her either. Because when a man loses everything, the last thing he wants is a reminder of the reason why. She tried to reach out to me. Of course she did. First, it was the texts, long, rambling messages about regret, about how she wasn't thinking clearly, about how she didn't mean to hurt me. Then came the calls, late at night, her voice thick with desperation, as if she thought that if she just said the right words, she could undo it all. But there were no right words. There never had been. The final blow came with the divorce. I had planned ahead. I had been careful. Every financial move, every legal step, every single thread that tied her life to mine, I had severed them before she even realized the knife was in my hand. She left with nothing. No house. No savings. No security. Just the weight of her own mistakes pressing down on her shoulders. And me? I walked away untouched. Better, even. Because while she was drowning in the wreckage of what she had done, I thrived. I moved on. I built a better life without her in it. A life where I didn't have to second-guess the person beside me. A life where I controlled the outcome, where I wasn't the fool in someone else's game. The last time I saw her, it wasn't planned. I was at a cafe downtown, drinking my coffee, enjoying my morning, when I heard the familiar shuffle of someone hesitating near my table. I glanced up, and there she was. She looked different. Not in the way that time changes people, but in the way that regret wears a person down. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes not as polished as they used to be. She had always been so put together, so poised. Now, she just looked tired. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but I just smiled, took another sip of my coffee, and stood up. I didn't need to hear whatever she had to say. I didn't care. Because she was already living her punishment. And I had already won. As I walked away from that cafe, leaving her standing there with whatever words she had been desperate to say, I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. No sense of loss. Just the crisp morning air, the warmth of my coffee in my hand, and the absolute certainty that I had done everything right. There was no need for one last conversation, no need for closure, because the truth was, I had closed this chapter long before she even realized the book was ending. Some people say revenge is pointless, that it doesn't change what happened. Maybe they're right. Maybe nothing could erase the months of lies, the stolen moments, the whispered betrayals. But here's what I know, justice isn't about erasing the past. It's about making sure the person who wronged you feels every ounce of the weight they once placed on your shoulders. It's about balance. And right now, looking at her face, worn, hollow, filled with an unspoken regret, I knew she felt it. She had gambled everything, thinking I would never find out, thinking she could always talk her way out of it, twist the story, shift the blame, beg for forgiveness when it suited her. But she had played the wrong game with the wrong man. She had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my patience for ignorance. And in the end, that mistake had cost her everything. I sat back down at my table and watched the world move on around me. The hum of conversation, the clinking of cups, the soft laughter of strangers living their own lives, untouched by the mess she had created. That was the difference between us now. I had moved on. She was still stuck in the ruins of her own choices, trying to grasp at something that was already gone. She stood there for a moment longer, as if hoping I would look back, acknowledge her, give her one last chance to explain. But I didn't. Because explanations don't change the past. Apologies don't rewrite history. And regret? Regret is just a consequence that comes too late. She turned and walked away. I didn't watch where she went. It didn't matter. Her path and mine had diverged the moment she decided that temporary excitement was worth more than the life we had built. And now she had to live with that choice. So here's my question to you. What would you have done? Would you have confronted her immediately, let the rage take over? Or would you have done what I did? Wait, plan, strike when she least expected it? Would you have been satisfied with walking away, knowing she had lost everything? Or would you have taken it even further? Tell me, if you were in my place, how far would you go?